Welcome back. Suburban Chevrolet Make the Choice Studios. Ira Weintraub and Bruce Motti. Bruce filling in for Sam Webb today like he did yesterday, doing a great job once again. And we're going to go to the phones now to our first of three guests that we have lined up for you on the show today. He is currently at Channel 7 in Detroit, but he is leaving us. He is heading to Boston to go to work at their Fox affiliate. So he is
he's going home.
He's a little less hockey and a little more football maybe. Tom, how are you?
Guy, it's great to be with you. Hey, Ira. Hey, Bruce. Good morning.
Morning.
I had my coffee. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Oh,
it's good
fantastic.
To be here.
So, Tom, the one thing that you're going to have, first off, I want to say this. He's not a native Detroiter. Tony Paul in the Detroit News said that he fooled us for, almost a decade because the way he was able to talk about Detroit and go from one topic to another. I think you also fooled us, Tom, because what the heck, you have no accent. But the thing is really what he was able to do, and I mean this sincerely, Tom. You came on really quick following another legend with Don Shane and did one heck of a job being able to tell us about the sports night in and night out here in Detroit and really made it a local piece. And that you have to be congratulated for. But one thing moving to Boston now, you're not going to see the college level as you've seen it over here. And we talked about this a little bit. Tell us a little bit about, what you're going to miss with the college level. And what were your favorite times here at Michigan covering the Wolverines and covering college sports?
You hit a lot of things right on the head there, Bruce. It was something I thought about. And, in traveling around, going to NCAA tournament games and covering bowl games and big games like the one in '06 against Ohio State when both teams were undefeated, you talk to people from other cities. And you begin to understand that the Detroit market is so unique because so few markets around the country have the professional sports teams in each of the major sports, and then two major Division I-A colleges that compete at the highest level in both basketball and football. So when you really look at it, there's 8 major programs in the Michigan/Detroit market. And I think the only ones we could really come up with were Denver, and that's if you include Colorado State, and San Francisco, Oakland. I think San Francisco, Oakland is the only other one that really has that plethora of schools when you include Cal and you include Stanford. So I never took that for granted. And I really got sucked into the pageantry and the competitiveness and the fun of the NCAA tournament, most notably. I mean, I remember being down in Charlotte with the Michigan team when you beat Tennessee, and then Darius Morris's shot clanged off the rim there in the final second. When I think that was Mike Krzyzewski's 900th win, so that's 100 wins ago for him. But moments like that, I remember. I obviously remember being down in Columbus for that game in '06 and the build up to that. And I was with Bo when Bo passed away. We could get into that a little bit if you want to talk about that at some point. And then, of course, being down. I actually been with Michigan State through most of the 2013 NCAA tournament, but then I picked up on the Michigan story because Brad Galley had been with Michigan in Dallas, and I was able to join the guys down in Atlanta. And that experience was great, too. So things that you just never could have thought you'd be a part of when you took this job became a part of your everyday life, and it became routine, and you can never take it for granted because it is so incredibly unique here.
You talked about, and we've got to get to it right now because you said you were there with Bo. And, talk to us a little bit about that day when, Bo passed away.
Gladly. And I really haven't told a story, so I might as well tell it now as I'm walking out the door. And largely I saved much of this because it was so personal. But what ended up happening is this. He came in, obviously he'd had some heart issues a couple weeks prior to the day that he passed away. And he had been in our studios previously, and the EMTs had to be called and everything else, and he was on the shelf for a bit. But he had gotten himself back. And you remember, Bruce, you had trotted him out to the podium earlier in that week, and he answered a bunch of questions about the game. So he really seemed, filled with vigor and alive, and it was neat to see. He kind of thrived in that environment. And you remember that documentary that was done about the game. Someone got that great shot of him sitting in Michigan Stadium. I mean, who would have known how poetic that shot would be of Bo looking over the field for what turned out to be that final time. But he showed up that Friday morning, and I had just been to a college reunion in Boston a couple of weeks before. So, he'd come in on Friday mornings, and we would laugh and tell stories and have a great time, and everyone was so excited about that weekend and what was in store. And I was actually going to Columbus. So I was there early to be able to hop in the truck. And I was telling him some stories about the college reunion I just had in Boston. I showed him some pictures of my daughter, who was very young at the time. And I honestly believe the last thing he ever said, he looked at me and he gave me back the picture of Dahlia and he goes, "You just be careful down there in Columbus. You stay on the fray, 'cause that girl needs a father." And just like that, you're laughing, I'm laughing, everybody's laughing, and we kind of break off and go our separate ways. And I went to the assignment desk, and then he walks to our locker room bathroom area. And I'm telling you, Bruce, Ira, no more than 90 seconds later, someone comes screaming out of the bathroom and says, "Call 911, Bo collapsed." And we're like, "Wait, what? What?" And all I saw was a stream of people coming out of the bathroom. And I looked at Don, because Don Shane was one of the people who was kind of running out of the bathroom at the time. I was like, "Who's with Bo?" And he said, "No one." And so I ran in there, and I knew that the photographer who was with me was certified in CPR. I knew that. So I said, "Get Dave." And so they got Dave, and I was the person who went into our locker room area there by the bathroom. And I was just holding Bo's hand, and I was holding his head. And he had hit his head, so he had a little cut on his head. And I grabbed his glasses, and I put his glasses in my shirt pocket. And Dave came running in. We started CPR. And you could tell. I mean, I don't know if you know the post report, but his internal defibrillator went off 18 times. I mean, the fact is the man dropped dead. That's what happened. His heart gave out, he dropped dead. But we're doing everything we possibly could. And I don't know about you, I've never been in a life and death situation with anybody, let alone somebody like Bo Schembechler. So I'm sitting here over this man saying, I cannot believe that this is happening right now, right here. And what do? You know, in those instances, you just got to step up and do the best you can. And Dave and I were there administering CPR as best we could. And we knew that the EMTs were coming. But in those instances, it seems like it's 20 minutes. From all accounts, it was less than 5. But the guys came in, and I'm figuring I'm going to get relieved, you know? Mm-hmm. And other people who were senior at our building were coming into the room, and they're like, no, Tom, just keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, just keep doing what I'm doing. The EMTs come in, and then we got to move them. And we get them out of the room. But they needed help as well. So I was kind of there through the whole process. And they got him on the stretcher. And at that point, they needed the phone number for Dr. Eagle. So Patrick McLaughlin was there, and he had Dr. Eagle's number. So the EMTs used my phone to call Dr. Eagle, and they got all the information they needed from him, the heart history and the neuropathy and everything else. And then, boom, he's off and he's in the ambulance. And you can imagine how incredibly shaken everybody was. And so by all accounts, we thought that was it. We were praying for a miracle, but we're thinking, oh, my gosh, I can't believe we all just were a part of that. So now the responsibility becomes, I'm going to Columbus no matter what. So no matter what happens here as it relates to Bo, it's a story. I mean, let's hope he lives, but if he passes away, we needed somebody to be on the scene in Columbus to get the reaction from the other side, because we knew this would be a national story. So we, in the midst of all this emotion, have to hop in the live truck and start driving to Ohio. And so I'm with the guy who had done the CPR, Dave Meinhardt and I, and we're, of course, listening to the radio, and my phone is blowing up, as you'd imagine, because everybody knows I work at Channel 7, and I'm ignoring all those phone calls because I don't know what's going on. And we're about halfway down, and our newsroom calls us, and they tell us that Bo had passed away. And never in my life have I experienced something like this with a coworker. The two of us pulled off to the side of the road and started bawling. It was unbelievable because we had been so close to it, and to hear it evolve and turn into a national story on the radio, and now all of a sudden be really far away from the story, because at this point we're a good 2.5 hours on the road away from the story that had just evolved, was a very surreal feeling. So we finally gather ourselves, and we're driving to Columbus, and I kind of hit my chest, and I was like, oh my God, I still have his glasses. And I grabbed the glasses out of my pocket, and if you know Bo, and you guys both do, he wore cologne. So, like, I smelled of the man because I'd been cradling his head and I'd been holding his hand. So it was a very, very odd and surreal feeling. But the weekend went on as it went on, and that was the most emotional thing I ever experienced in my life, let alone anything I experienced here as it relates to Michigan. Kind of crazy, right?
Crazy. That story, Ira and I were looking at each other. We're in different studios, and we were looking at each other just, aghast. I mean, I have never heard that story, Tom. Never. And that had to – it's interesting because Tom mentioned that he had a job to do. as a reporter. And that's how I felt when I went to the hospital, that I had a job to do, because everybody said, Bruce, you were so composed. Everything was so – you know what job you have to do. But for you to have to do that job and to have just held him, and then to have what you said, the smell, the feel, the whole thing, I can't even imagine how that would be with anybody who had passed. And then you've got yourself, a legendary coaching figure that you're going to have to do a story. That must have been the toughest day of your career.
It was incredible. I mean, have you ever in your career, in the middle of it all, with a colleague, just gone into a corner and cried? That's what we did. Dave and I, we couldn't continue. We needed to gather ourselves, and it had been so emotional that we just had to gather ourselves and compose. And as we pulled over into a rest stop, here we are in the Channel 7 truck at a rest stop, and just bawling. And we knew that that's kind of how everybody associated with Michigan and who knew college football was going to feel that day. So I guess it was good that we got it out of our system early, because, again, we were able to shift it into gear. And the people at Ohio were great. We talked to Gene Smith, and we talked to so many of the fans down there, and everybody was incredibly gracious. And then we had to be there when the team arrived. And I remember John Falk. Oh, man, he shows up, and his lips were quivering. And he was, because the game was being played the next day,
right,
basically thrown out there as the person to give a thought. And the poor guy, you could tell he was devastated. So you can say what you want about how the team rallied the next day, but it had to affect how they prepared for that game. And the game still played out so incredibly close and competitive. They all deserve a ton of credit.
I'm trying to put myself in Tom's shoes. I went through journalism school, had choices as to what I wanted to do with my career. I got into sports. One of the reasons why was because you avoid, for the most part, life and death situations. The stories are, for the most part, they're fun, and it's games. And that's, I'm sure, one of the reasons that, Bruce, you're in the business. Tom, I'm sure that's one of the reasons you're in the business. We get to talk about games. And you have to go from talking about a game and in a pretty instant moment. We talk about sudden change in football. I mean, this is the ultimate sudden change in this profession that none of us really signed up for, but you have to do it when the job calls for it.
You're right, Ira. It's one of those things that you got to be prepared for. And I think one thing, Bruce, you mentioned as we started the conversation, I was able to quickly adapt to Detroit. And I think that just comes from research and understanding and basic knowledge of the history of this game. I thought it was so cool. I watched the Fab Five and all the success of Michigan, even dating back to '89 in the basketball tournament. And because the East Coast didn't have major college football, yes, I went to Boston College, but Bruce, I'm sure you were there on the day that Desmond Howard came to BC and lit it up.
Yes.
I remember, I was a student then at BC, and I remember walking towards the stadium and seeing Michigan's equipment truck. And on the side of the equipment truck were the stickers for all the different bowl games that Michigan had gone to over the years. And I said, we're not even in that universe. That's not our reality. So I had embraced and I had kind of adopted Michigan growing up as my team because, like everybody else, or like many other people, I loved the helmets and I loved the whole aura around the team. So for me, in the 80s, without a major college football team on the East Coast, I mean, obviously I rooted for Doug Flutie in BC, but Michigan was my team. So I was actually at the 89-90 Rose Bowl, which ended up being Bo's last game.
Yes.
So now combine those two stories. All right, so you're with Bo on the day he dies and the moments that he dies, and go back in time to January 1st, 1990, when that 17-year-old high school senior is in the Rose Bowl, sitting in the corner end zone section, and have a little angel tell that 17-year-old kid, oh, and by the way, when that coach dies, you're going to be with him. I mean, those are the moments in life that are always very odd to me. So you never know what might happen, and you got to be prepared for anything.
Tom, the story, absolutely wonderful. And now, I mean, for those people listening, I mean, now you know why Tom Leyden was is such a great broadcaster, and you can tell the stories. You did I'm telling you, Ira and I are just looking at each other, just absolutely like, wow. The way you brought that to life and how everything went, and then, of course, to tell the story of how you went to the Rose Bowl and saw Bo's last game and then were there for Bo's last minutes. Absolutely stories that, I'm telling you this, I had goose pimples literally when you were telling that story, Tom. I have never heard that story. It is absolutely an amazing story. And it is amazing because you and I in Ira, we play in the toy department. That's where we work. This is the toy department, right?
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, and you had something like Ira said that is just totally different than what we ever signed up for. And when you take a look at this, and I think a lot of people forget that because one of the lines I always had as a PR guy is don't get too close to your coach because you might have to write the press release that says that he's going to get fired. And you have to also keep that type of, that journalistic professional arm's length from these individuals. But, I mean, don't you start to feel for some of these guys, the coaches that you deal with, the pro sports, even the pro sports guys that you deal with? They become close for you, don't they?
And, Bruce, I can give you two examples of instances where I wouldn't say it was awkward, but I think there was an understanding. One of them was with Lloyd Carr, and one of them was with Steve Yzerman. And I'll share them both quickly. I covered Chad Henne in high school. So I knew before he got to Michigan, I knew him for 4 years. When I first got here in 2004 and he was a freshman, he looked at me, he's like, what the hell are you doing here? So we had a track record. And if you recall his senior year game against Ohio State, he'd been hurt the whole season, and Ryan Mallett had been playing really well.
Right.
And they lost, and it's arguable, and I still contend to Lloyd that he should have pulled Chad. Mm-hmm. Because Chad he was banged up, and he wasn't playing that great, and Ryan had shown that he could, handle stuff under center. And no one was asking the question. And I think to an extent, Lloyd in the back of his mind would have known that I knew Chad and had a deeper relationship with him.
Right.
And I remember after the game, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. I got to ask this question. And so I remember asking the question about, was there any consideration of you taking Chad out of the game? And it was, if there's any fault of Lloyd's, there might be a fault of loyalty. And I think that he appreciated that this was Chad's senior year, that he hadn't beaten Ohio State yet, that he'd battled for so hard to get back in the game, and he was going to give him every opportunity to do that. So even if strategically it may have been the right move, perhaps, to get Ryan in the game, and he may refute this if you ever ask him about it, but you could tell he was defensive based on his loyalty,
right? But
he was giving me that look of like, oh, why'd you ask me that question? Because it was legit. So I understood that, and I learned that about Lloyd, of how loyal of a guy he was. The one with Steve Yzerman that was really touching to me was when I was at the funeral of Bob Probert in Windsor. And Steve was being, asked a bunch of questions by people, and it got really emotional because during the funeral, Bob Probert's daughters were speaking. And Steve's got a bunch of daughters.
Right.
So somebody asked Steve about what that moment was like, and he gave a very short answer. And you could tell that he wanted to move on. And I recall vividly, he looked me in the eye, and you could sense him throwing a life jacket. He's like, please help me, get me off this topic. He gave me that look of like, Deuce, ask me something else. And I remember in that moment just being kind of flustered because I wasn't really prepared at that second to ask a question. And I kind of was like, but that's the human connection, of people who you get to meet and that trust you get with an athlete or a coach where they have that you have it, you guys know, you have that different connection with them and kind of sense where their head is when you're talking to them.
Well, I think there are special people in this business that have that special type of connection. And, Tom, when you're on the air, you can see that connection. And you did one heck of a job in Detroit. I know I'm going to miss you. I think the fans are going to miss you. I'm going to tell you, you would have been truly, if you'd have stuck around here, you would have been one of the greats of all time because, they would have been putting you in the names of all the great journalists. You've done a heck of a job in the Detroit area. You're going to do a great job in Boston. And I'm going to find a publisher for you to write a story about everything that happened in Detroit because the stories you have told were absolutely outstanding. And I'm sure you have a number more that you can rattle off at a moment's notice.
It was great. And I love this place. I mean, my kids were born here. It's been 10 years that we never could have predicted would go so well. And I was talking to my guys in the studio last night, and I said, listen, where we are right now, I believe that the stable of coaches that we have right now leading those 8 major programs, and I'll even add Red Berenson and Tom Anastas on there to make it 10, are the strongest coaches that we've had across the board. And that really shows me that the days and months and years ahead are going to be really good. Because when you go from Harbaugh to D'Antonio to Izzo to Beeline to Babcock to Van Gundy I put Ausmus kind of down there. He still has some proving to do. But you know where I'm going here.
Yes.
Jim Caldwell, who's a really good guy. You got an amazing stable of leaders in this city, and I think that bodes well for the future.
Well, Tom, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm telling you that these stories were absolutely amazing.
I touched the hearts of some former Wolverines that are sending me messages this morning after hearing the story.
And I'm going to tell you this right now. I really, like I said, I really have appreciated you personally on the air, and I'm sure the fans and who have watched you on Channel 7 WXYZ TV have really appreciated it. And the only thing I can say is just get a bigger snow shovel because.
Who would have thought that, right?
Yeah,
it's been crazy.
Yeah, just check the PSI on your tires. And
Tom, listen, I want to thank you for joining us. I know I'll see you before you leave, but again, thanks for joining us on WTKA, the Michigan Insider.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks. Have a great day.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom. And obviously, our loss in Detroit is Tom Brady's gain in Boston, and we appreciate Tom joining us. That I was getting messages from former football players during that segment, just floored, blown away by the story.
You talk about walking into great radio.
That's the best kind. The best kind of radio are the ones where you ask a question and you don't realize that you're about to get the answer of all answers. I
didn't even know how to answer the second question. I didn't know. I was just flabbergasted.
Right, because when you and I were talking about having Tom on, you had just said you said, he's the pro versus college angle that you were talking about, and you said he can give really good perspective on leaving Michigan behind, and we can have some fun with it.
Right.
You did not expect to get the story.
No.
That was a phenomenal story.
That's a phenomenal story.
And I'll help him put it in print if he wants to.
Oh my! I was thinking of that right now. Oh my Lord!
Yeah, that one needs to be.
Yes.
A lot of listeners really enjoyed it, and we'll have to get that one out to the masses a little bit later on. As we go to the break, we do want to remind everybody this is one of those tough transitions, but we have to take care of everybody out there in our listening audience. We give you great interviews, we give you great stories, and we also give you reminders like. There are only 4 days until Valentine's Day, and that, of course, is the one day that women expect flowers, and it's coming up this weekend in 4 days. Pro Flowers makes it easy to take care of flowers with the click of a mouse. We will make it very easy. When she says she doesn't need flowers, she says she really means is you better get me flowers. And we have a great offer for you, 100 blooms of love plus a free glass vase for our listeners. For just $19.99, or really impress her, an upgrade to add a premium romantic vase, gourmet chocolates, a teddy bear, and a lavender spa kit, all for just $19.99 more. So go to proflowers.com and use our code Sam and Ira. Pro Flowers is quick, easy, and delivery on Valentine's Day is guaranteed. Can't beat the price and convenience. Get it done now before it's too late. Pro Flowers makes it easy to check off the to-do list. Even if you have Valentine's Day plans, you need flowers and you need them delivered. It's a must for Valentine's Day for the love of your life. Pro Flowers are guaranteed to last 7 days or more, and your money is or your money back. It's a no-brainer. As I say, guaranteed for 7 days or more. I have Pro Flowers roses on the counter in my house still. They are now over a week old. I was showing them to the ladies in the office yesterday, and they were saying how lucky my wife is to have them in the house because they last for over a week. They are still blooming. They are still gorgeous. A little pre-Valentine's gift from Cupid for my wife, and they are going strong. I'm going to do my best to keep them going until Saturday for Valentine's Day. Here's the only way to get this amazing Valentine's Day deal. Go to proflowers.com, click on the blue microphone in the top right corner, and type in Sam and Ira. That's proflowers.com. Click on the microphone and type in the code Sam and Ira, Sam ANDIRA. Order today. This deal expires tomorrow night at midnight. Step aside, take a break. A lot more of the show to roll along here, including John Paul, Michigan lacrosse coach, on the about 8:45, and Eric Adelson at around 9:05. So we'll get to that and more as we continue here on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTKA.